Okay, so welcome to our fourth webinar of the month. This webinar will be covering custom fields and in particular scripting of those custom fields in Easy Insight. This is a little bit more involved of a topic than the ones we've covered thus far. I'm going to try to go as slowly as I can here. Feel free to jump in with questions on the Q&A at any point. And we'll go ahead and get going here. So, custom fields, and in particular, scripting of those custom fields in Easy Insight. Here we're going to start with our usual report builder. In this case, we're just on the sample data source. Now, for adding a custom field, you'll see that there is the custom field menu in the blue bar at the top. If we click on this, we see that we have options for add custom measure, add custom grouping, and add custom date. So it's important to note here, add custom measure is going to add in a measure, some sort of numeric quantity that can be aggregated together in some way. It can be summed, it can be averaged. It's different from a numeric ID in that you can, again, combine it in some sort of aggregation. A custom grouping is going to be something that you group the data by. It's a stage, it's a project name. That's where an ID value would come in. And custom date, that one at least is pretty easy. That's just a date field. So we'll go ahead and do a very simple initial one here. We'll add deal size to our report. And then we'll go ahead and create a custom measure on top of deal size. So this is not the most involved one example, but here in the what should the calculation be, we're going to put in what the calculation for the custom field is. You'll see that field names are surrounded by square brackets. That's what tells Easy Insight that, hey, this is a field name. For numbers, you can just put the number in, and you can use your normal set of operators. So I could do times 2, I could do plus 10,000, I could do minus 10,000, or I could do divided by 2. So those are kind of your standard mathematical operators you can use. When you're creating a custom field, you'll need to give it a name. We can save. Now that we've created the custom field, it will be available for us under the Report Custom Fields folder. It'll be shown at the bottom of your list of fields. You click on Sample Measure, and it populates into the report. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and adjust the sample measure. So to go back to it, we can click on the green drop-down and do Edit this Report Custom Field. So we have a question. So this field is added to the report, not the data source. That is correct. This field by default is added to the report, not to the data source. We'll hopefully cover adding to the data source, but we'll kind of see how we get time-wise here. And then as far as being used in other reports, that'll reflect, we'll try to get to that in this session here, depending on how we do time-wise. Okay, so editing this custom field. So let's say we want to divide deal size by, well, let's see here. Let's do this actually here. We're going to go ahead and create a second measure. We're going to give it a name of one amount. And we're going to use a little bit more involved logic on this particular one. Let's see, actually, no, sorry, I had to think through what I was doing there a little bit. We're actually going to go back to sample measure. So if we want to divide by a second measure, we could do deal size divided by opportunity count. So that's going to divide deal size by the opportunity count. Now, as an alternative, we can open up the sales folder. Now, when you're looking at the fields in this left-hand list, you can always just drag them into the what should the calculation be section. So we could drag one amount in, just saves us from typing it, then divide it by deal size. So this is getting us what percentage of our total deal amount has been won. Okay, so we'll go ahead and save this. Now you see that our value is 1, which doesn't seem correct. That's because for a percentage, we need to go ahead and do multiply by 100, as shown here. And there, we now have 51. Now, because this is a percentage, we do want to adjust the formatting on it. So we can again click on sample measure, do edit this report custom field, go to general field properties, and change the formatting from number to percentage. We can then scroll down and click on save. And now we see that we have 51% showing. Okay. All right. So next, let's take a look at one of the trickier things here, which is under general field properties, there is this setting that says apply before aggregation. Now, this is an important one because what it's doing is telling Easy Insight when to apply this calculation. So if apply before aggregation is checked, then it's going to run the calculation before it aggregates together values. If it's unchecked, then it's going to run the calculation after it's aggregated values together. So to kind of show how this would affect things, let's go ahead and let's see. So here we have our different sales reps. Reorder that. Okay, so if we set that to apply before aggregation, you see that our values immediately become very, very much off. That's because what it's doing is on a row level, it's then running that calculation of a percentage. So per row, it's calculating one amount divided by deal size, and then it's summing up all those values when it then runs aggregation. So in this case, you'll definitely want to have apply before aggregation off. So there certainly are cases where you'll want to change that setting, but in general, I would recommend sticking with the defaults and then as you need to, adjusting that setting to get the results you need. I know that part's a little tricky, so are there any questions around how apply before and after aggregation works? So we have a question. Can you give an example of when you would want to apply before? I'm trying to think what a good example would be in this context. So let's say we're doing something like this, and we're going to come back. Our next step is going to go over the logic we're using here a little bit more. But let's say we're doing if So something here where we're comparing to the grouping. So we're saying we only want to see Amy's values. And trying to think how I would make that make sense for this context. Let me think on this one. So let me think on this question as we keep going here, and I'll try to come back with a good example of why you would want to apply before in the case of a measure. Certainly, we do it. Just I'm unfortunately coming up with a blank on that at the moment. Okay, so, well, actually, my next topic is going to give us an example of why we would want to do that. So, okay, so next, let's look at how you would calculate the interval between two dates. So we have the date that each opportunity was created and the date at which it was won. Now, if we want to calculate how many days were between those two dates, we can use a function to do it. So the set of different functions are available under functions. They also should be in our documentation. In this case, we're going to do days between, and then we're going to grab date created and date won. This function, and so for functions, it's going to be the function name, an open parenthesis, and then whatever fields are passed into that function. So this is like days to win. Now this is an example where we actually would want to have it apply before aggregation, because per record, we're trying to calculate what the number of days to win the opportunity is. So if we go ahead and add that into our report, we now see the number of days to win. So in this case, it's 296 days between September 9th, 2019 and July 1st, 2020. If we want to aggregate this one, we could change it to an average, drop off our other fields. So now we're seeing the average days to win per sales rep. Now to go back to the wanting to apply before aggregation, we want to calculate per date created and date won what the number of days between those is. So we're calculating that at a row level, and we're then aggregating and averaging that data together after to calculate it per sales rep. There are other functions available as well. So for example, if we do, let's see. So if we want to compare how long it's been from when the deal was created to the current date time, we can use the function nowDate. There aren't any parameters for nowDate, so we just do an open parenthesis and a close parenthesis. And when we save that, it's now showing us how long it was between when the deal was initially created and the current date time. Okay, so we kind of did this one a little bit earlier, but we're going to jump back to it, which is if statements. So this is one that you'll end up using a lot. So an if statement allows you to figure out for a given condition what something should do. So you'll typically do if, you'll have an open parenthesis. Then we could do something like current stage. And again, as one thing that you can always do when you're building out your calculations like this, as you can see here, it says hit tab to autocomplete the field name. We hit tab and it autocompletes and saves us from having to type everything else in. For comparisons, if it's a text value like this, typically the two comparisons you're going to use are equals equals, which is that is testing for equality. So if we're saying if, and then when we have and then if we're comparing to just a text value, we'll do double quotes. We can then put in the value ourselves, or we can hit tab again. And if possible, it'll pull back the list of values that you can compare to. So we could say if current stage equals closed one. So in this case, we're only pulling back a deal size if the deal is in the current closed one stage. That's what this equals equals is saying. If we wanted to say not equal to, we would do exclamation point equals. That is saying not equal to 1. And it also does an if-else type logic here. So this is saying if current stage is not equal to closed one, then put in deal size. We can go ahead and change this back to equality. And then if we want to add in a second branch of logic here, we could put in another comma, do deal size times deal probability. So what this is now saying is if the deal has been won, return the deal size. Otherwise, return the deal size multiplied by the deal probability. You can also nest if statements together. So what we could do as a further one in this condition of the not part is say if current stage equals lost, then do 0. Otherwise, return deal size times deal probability. So what this is saying is if the current stage is closed one, return deal size. If the current stage is lost, return 0. Otherwise, return deal size multiplied by deal probability. Since these can get kind of involved, there is some additional highlighting shown in the area below here. Field names are highlighted in blue, text is highlighted in orange, and operators are shown in green. So especially if you have a problem getting a calculation to validate, this can help you identify where your problem is. For example, if there's a typo in a field name, it'll then show in red here, along with a warning indicator. If you're missing a closed parenthesis, you'll see you need to add a right parenthesis as a warning message. Any questions around if statements there? I know that gets a little bit more involved, but they do provide a lot of power for what you can then do in the logic of your reports. Okay. Next, let's look at what you can do with that scripting of if statements beyond custom fields and for conditional formatting. So if we go to configuration and then to conditional formatting, this is where we can apply custom formats like custom foreground colors, background colors, other styling based on the same sort of scripting. So what we could say is if days to win is greater than 500, and Okay, so now let's go over comparing numbers in an if statement. So you're going to have, so equality is going to be the same thing, equals equals. You also have greater than, less than, greater than equal to, and less than equal to. So in this case, we'll say greater than 500. Then we can use some style-specific functions. You see some examples up here at the top. In this case, we'll go ahead and change the background color of days to win if the days to win is greater than 500. Now the colors are going to be HTML color codes. There's a color calculator available for you here if you need help in finding a particular color. So for example, this red is going to have the HTML hex color here. We can copy that, paste it in. As you can see from the warning, we need to add one more right parenthesis. We save, and now those values are shown with a red background color. Now the contrast is a little tough there as far as seeing the black on the red background. So if we go back to conditional formatting, we could copy this entire line, do color text, and put in white, which is FF, FF, FF. So we're saying if days to win is greater than 500, set the background color to this medium red. And if greater than 500, set the text color of days to win to white. And we see it accordingly. Any questions around conditional formatting? Okay. Go ahead and create a fresh report here. Okay, so next, let's look at some of the text functions that are available to you. So we'll go ahead and add current stage as an example field to our report here. So this time we're going to do custom field, and we're going to do add custom grouping. Okay, so there are a number of different text functions available. They're as simple as doing, for example, upper is going to give you an uppercase version of whatever text you pass in. So if we save that, add that to our report, there we see the uppercase version of the field. If we edit that and use lower, then we get a lowercase version of the field. We can also do something like current stage, and then before that put stage equals. If you need to combine different text, you could do something like, you could put in double quotes whatever text you want, then do a plus sign, and it will concatenate the two values in terms of text. So if we put that there, then we see stage equals created, closed, etc. There's a question as to whether we have a proper function. That is a good question. I'm not sure offhand. I feel like we do, but I don't remember what it is offhand. So let me get back to you on that one. Okay. You can also do things like, let's say we want to pull the value after the dash. So won or lost. We could do split current stage dash 1. What this is going to do is split current stage into whatever values are divided up by dashes. And then the third parameter here is which one we want. It starts off at a 0 offset, so 0 would pull the first value before a dash. 1 is going to pull the first value after a dash. So as you can see there, it pulled won and lost as being the values after dashes. This can be especially useful if you encode a lot of other information into a field value. So if you have like a budget category on a project name, things like examples like that can be extremely useful for getting additional reportable information out of your data. Any other questions around text functions? Okay. There are also other functions available around the date side. So as you can see under dates here, we have the business day of month, the number of business days between, the number of business days in a month, the day of month, day of quarter, day of year. So what you can do with these is things like date created plus months one. That's going to give you the date that is 1 month past the date created. Okay, let's go ahead and go into the sequence functions next. So these are very powerful and very useful, but a little bit involved again. So what these are going to do is help us find the first or last value relative to something. So let's say for each sales rep here, we want to find the first date at which they won a deal. So we'll go ahead and do a custom date. We're going to use the first function. We're going to be finding the first per sales rep. Now, this second parameter is one that we're actually going to be removing. So don't worry about it. I'm just going to use X in this case. I know it's a little weird, but this is sort of a legacy from some addition from kind of how things worked before. Like I said, this parameter is going to go away, so I would not worry about it. Then we're going to put in date 1 and date 1. Why do we put this in twice? The first one here is telling us for each date, basically for each sales rep, sort the data based on the date 1, and then the parameter after that is the date that we're actually going to return as data. So we'll go ahead and explain that a little bit more here, but we'll give it a name. We'll save. We'll add it to the report. And now we're seeing the first date 1 for each sales rep. Now, what's an example where we would have different values for these parameters? So let's say we do a custom grouping. And this time we want to show what was the title of the deal that was the first one that sales rep won. So here we're going to put in, we're still going to have date one as the parameter we sort by, but deal title will be the value that we actually return. So the first customer per sales rep is then shown, well, in this case, our deal titles are just ID values, but it's giving us what that first ID was. So we have a question of, could min work there? And yes, if you pass in a measure as opposed to a date, I believe it'll use first. It should work fine there. And then the same thing is true if you want to do last. You would just change this from first to last. And now it's the last deal that each customer won. Same here, we can change this to last customer. Last. And now we're seeing the last customer won per sales rep. Any questions around those sequence functions? All right. Go ahead and get a fresh report going here again. Okay, so next we're going to go ahead and do some and go over some functions that are tied in to filters. So what we could do, so we'll go ahead and add deal size here. So let's say we want to have a weight value that we're going to multiply deal size by, and that we want that value to be configurable by the end user of the report. So especially for forecasting, this can be useful as a use case. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and create a filter. In this case, we could go ahead and just choose pretty much anything. We're going to do a pattern match filter. Okay, so here what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and edit the filter. We're going to rename it to weight. And now the important thing here is we're going to check this little option that says, should this filter be a parameter filter? You'll see that there's a little icon displayed next to a parameter filter. What this is doing is saying this is a filter which is going to be used as a parameter by scripting. So it's not going to apply the filter like a typical filter would run on a report or dashboard. Next, in our function, we'll go ahead and do deal size times, and then to reference the value out of that filter, we will put in single filter value, double quotes, and the name of the filter. So this is going to multiply deal size by whatever value is put into that text input for weight. So if we add this into our report, right now it's 0 because there's no value there. We go ahead and put in 2, and it updates accordingly. Any questions around that? So if you want, we have a question, how would you make 2 the default in that filter? So if you simply saved the report here, from the editor, it's going to save with whatever value you put into the editor. So if I now go to the end user, you see that 2 is the value that's saved and presented to the end user. Let's see, some other functions that may be useful to you. Let's see, if you need to display a date in a custom format, you can do date format, your date field, and then the format, which is going to follow the same sort of format as we normally use. So you have some options there for text formatting. And then the vice versa of that, if you need to parse the data out of text, you can do parse date, pass in your text field, and then in double quotes, put in the format that is used to parse the data out. If you need to replace in text, you could do replace. So let's see here, let's actually build an example for this. So let's say for current stage, well, not sure. Here we'll do replace current stage, closed state. And there it replaces the word closed with the word state. Just trying to see what else is good to cover here while we're in here. Any questions around anything we've gone over so far here? If you need to clean up the custom fields you've created, you can go to custom field, edit or delete custom fields. And then you can then remove the field from this window just to kind of clean up what you have in your report. You can also do copy field. So you can do a copy, choose sample replace, for example, and then copy it to create a variant on that field. Let's see, what else can we do as an example here? Beyond the if statement, you can also do case statements as another type of branching logic. So for example, if we do case sales rep, we could have one value return. So here for each of our sales reps, we're returning different values. So what this is going to say is, if the value for sales rep is Amy, return team 1. If it's Lisa, return team 1. If it's Jim, return team 2. If it's Mark, return team 2. And if it's something beyond any of these at all, return team 3. So this could just be a little bit more compact than an if statement, especially if you have a lot of different things to compare and return. So as you can see, if we then add sales rep and case statement example to our report, we have team 1, team 2, and team 3. Any questions around case statements or anything else we've covered? Yes, you can. So the question is, could you then group on that? So if we go ahead and put in deal size, it's going to sum up the deal size based on each of those values that were returned from that case statement example. So we have a question, could we then throw sales rep in between those two columns? And yes, we could. So if we add sales rep back in, drag it over. Now we're seeing team, sales rep, and the deal size for each of those. Any other questions around case statements? All right. Let's see, what else do we have to cover here? Okay, so I think this is probably our next one to cover. So we have a question, can you save and use case custom field later somewhere so that if you edit it once, it edits elsewhere? So there's a few different ways to go about this. The simplest way is if you do navigate, configure the data source, and go to fields, you can add custom measures, groupings, and dates here. And once you've added them, they will show up under data source fields as opposed to report custom fields. And if you edit it just here, it'll change across your different reports. So we have a question that does not mess up syncing. That shouldn't mess anything up there as far as what you're doing. When you're setting up a custom field like this, you can also do add field to data source. So what this will do is this gives you a convenient way to directly add this field to your data source. Or, and this is probably outside the scope of this webinar, but if you have a calculation report set up that makes sense, you could add it directly to that calculation report from this window. We'll be covering calculation reports in a dedicated webinar, hopefully in the next month or two here. Any other questions around adding fields to your data source so that you can reuse them across reports? All right, let's see. While I figure out what else to go over, any questions around anything we've covered? Um, well, I'm not sure what else I have to cover then. Let's see. I guess we'll go ahead and just kind of go Q&A here. So we have 10 minutes left on the call here. So if you have any other questions you want to throw in, go ahead and go for them here. So we have a question. So go ahead and ask about filters while we're in here. Okay, so that's actually, so we have a question. What's the difference between create filter and add filter to this field? So we said we were going to cover custom fields in this call, and that is kind of an important one actually. So let's go over that. So when we do create, so let's go ahead and we'll put in deal size and opportunity count. If we do create filter and we put a filter on sales rep and we change it to Amy, the report is only showing data where the sales rep is Amy. Now, let's say instead we want to have a field that is specifically tied to Amy. So if we copy deal size, we say Amy's deal size, and we then add a filter to this field for Amy. And we add this field to our report. You'll see that we're now, that filter was applied only to this field, not to the rest of the report. And we could then build a calculation onto that to say Amy's deal size divided by deal size. And let's see, actually, so if we then drop sales rep out, there will be showing 19%. Did that help as far as explaining field level filters versus report level filters? All right, any other questions around custom fields, scripting, anything like that? So there's a question, it seems like when you edit a field, it turns it into a custom field. So that's going to kind of depend on how you change the field. But basically the reason it does create a custom field out of an edited field is that way if you're referencing it in another calculation, another custom field calculation, you can reference the one you've changed versus having to create a whole other version of it, manually create a whole other version of that field. It's something that's a little sneaky, but we found that helps with usability, basically. All right, we have a few minutes left here. Any other questions? We'll probably be taking it, we're probably not going to do a webinar next week, but we will be doing one hopefully the week after. So if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see covered, feel free to email us or just kind of let us know what you'd like to see. Go ahead and wait another minute or two here, and then if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and call it a webinar. Well, I think it seems like I think we've covered everything and there are no other questions. So everybody have a great weekend, and we will email out this recording and we'll let you know when our next webinar is scheduled for. Thanks for your time today, and we hope this helped you understand custom fields and scripting in Easy Insight.